Joe?
It's ARM day. Let's get some overclocking on.
Why are you in my studio? Hey everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap of the week. In this one, Intel is getting sued. You could spell the sue two ways right now. Also, the 9800X3D has sort of a supply shock situation where it vanished instantaneously. So we have some news on that. We talked to AMD and some retailers to try and figure out what the restocking interval looks like. And further, we'll be talking about some more ARM versus Qualcomm and Qualcomm versus ARM. They're suing each other. They like to share. We'll be talking about that lawsuits. And then additionally, we've got NVIDIA maybe making a consumer CPU. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly's Aeronaut and Hydronaut thermal pastes. Aeronaut is Thermal Grizzly's entry-level thermal solution, marketed as resistant to curing and for long-term endurance. Hydronaut is Thermal Grizzly's next step up, targeted for overclocking and higher performance applications. We've used Hydronaut on a lot of our systems internally over the years. You can learn more at the link in the description below. All right, so first up, I'm gonna try and keep this as short as possible. We have a good amount of GN updates to balance this. We've gone with a sort of extra long episode. You can jump around. Is it over there? I think it's over there in the time bars if you don't want to hear this. First up, we have the final numbers for the North Carolina Hurricane Relief t-shirt. That was the donation drive we did for the shirts we sold for charity relief for those affected by hurricanes in our home state of North Carolina, affected in western North Carolina. So these shirts had 100% of profit donated to 3 groups focused on relief efforts. In addition to the shirt sales, we added in some extra on top of it, including an additional $1,000 from a separate community effort. And then the total comes out to, split between the 3 groups evenly, $26,000 in total after we threw an extra couple grand on top of it. Viewers also separately donated to the groups. We don't have a way to track that or know how much it was, but it was awesome to hear about some of you who decided to do that. If you want to learn more about the groups we chose for this, or if you just didn't even know what happened, you can check out our announcement of the Hurricane Relief Drive in our video linked below. And this means a lot to us, especially because many of us on the team have spent time in the areas affected, like Asheville and Banner Elk. They should begin shipping by the end of November. They are finishing production now, and they'll ship into early December due to volume. That's for that update. Another quick update. Joe Stepanzi, aka Bearded Hardware, is now confirmed to be here. Talked about this a couple times. He is actually on the way in as I film this right now. And he's gonna be up for hopefully an overclocking stream. We might just do a filmed upload instead, just depends on our timing. But it's gonna be 98X3D with liquid nitrogen. And we haven't done one in a while, but what I'm hoping to do is maybe use a game for the benchmark rather than something like Cinebench or whatever, so we can actually look at the FPS impact. Our biggest limiter is going to be the GPU. So it'll be a fun time. That is going to either be filmed or streamed on Sunday, depending on how smoothly things go. And you can look out for that one because the 9800X3D has been a pretty exciting part to work on, a lot of fun, and we really want to bring it to as high as we possibly can for clocks. We have a discovery to talk about and a correction to issue relating to that. So we have a new batch of 7950X3D gaming tests specifically that we are reissuing relating to all this. Here's the brief diagnostic. In the 9800X3D review gaming charts only, we have an impact we consider moderate under our errors and corrections definitions. The cause is due to a combination of an unexpected BIOS behavior and a gap in our process control. We missed a BIOS setting that changes based on which CPU is installed and caused low performance unique to the 7950X3D data. The result is the 7950X3D CPU data was low in that video. No other data was affected. There is no impact to the conclusions in the 9800X3D review content. This does not affect the 7950X3D review content from previously and was not an issue back then. The resolution. So we did a diagnostic post-mortem. I spent all day with Patrick working on figuring things out. We have an update to the errors page on gamersnexus.net/errors, where you can find all of our known published and qualifying errors for the past year. We've done a pinned comment, updated description, in-video YouTube pop-out card, which is a feature more people should use. I think they don't know it exists, though, and new charts in the written article. That could kind of be the start and the end of it. We could get to news, but I thought this is probably pretty useful to share the diagnostics for anyone who might be doing a dual CCD, especially X3D core parking setup. This might change with the 9950X3D. We'll talk about that. So we're just going to run the full diagnosis here that Patrick and I did, just in case it helps anyone. If you don't care about this, you're not going to use the 7950X3D, you can skip ahead. All right, so for reference, we already follow AMD's 47-page guide for setup on core parking configuration for CPUs like the 7950X3D. This includes running a command prompt command to check that core parking is functioning. We do that. And it also includes running process idle tasks in command prompt to clear chipset gremlins and ensure drivers are working properly, as the motherboard will default to driver control for core parking under typical conditions. So we already follow that 47-page guide for setup. However, in addition to that, and in addition to using a clean and fully isolated Windows install for the core parked CPUs, there were two separate BIOS settings that were not accounted for and which we are now manually inspecting. This did not affect the original 7950X3D review in any capacity. It only affects the gaming data in the 9800X3D review. So with the right sequence of events, which is why we hadn't seen it, following a CPU resocket, which is only a user scenario if you're upgrading, the X670E Hero can end up with core parking reported as functioning and as enabled, and even parking cores. The command prompt command shows an 8-core park, which is correct, but it's not functioning properly, which gave us a false sense of security, knowing that we already had a clean OS. So here's how we diagnosed it. Telling Windows Game Bar that Resource Monitor, or Resmon, is a game allows us to trick Windows for easy diagnosis. Doing this identified that core parking, again, was on and functioning, but it was parking the wrong CCD. That's the problem. We did identify that data discrepancy, and it did jump out to us, but we followed all of AMD's prescribed troubleshooting steps for a dual CCD X3D setup, and they all came back as clear. So because we had just updated to Windows 24H2, we updated AGESA BIOS, obviously, with that, and also the chipset drivers, which have some massive changes coming in, by the way. All of that can affect core parking and the core parking behavior. And it was one of those, like, we had enough red herrings to make a fish fillet. The point is, we thought it was probably one of those things that was changed. BIOS had CPPC dynamic preferred cores configured to auto, which is the default setting. With all other settings also at default values, it should automatically park the CCD that's at the higher frequency in favor of more cache for gaming. Instead, it was deferring to another setting: processor, aggregator, device, and core count control within the AMD Advanced PBS submenu, which we leave undefined in our test setup process. If this setting ends up inadvertently configured to disabled on a device that should use core parking, so a 7950X3D, but if CPPC is auto, then even with the right chipset driver configuration and a clean Windows install, the result will be parking the wrong CCD. For the 7950X3D, we used a BIOS profile to jumpstart the secondary and tertiary timing control setup, and this is where we found the gap in the process. So this is totally ignoring the OS. Forget about that. It's already clean. If you save a BIOS profile containing settings such as memory timings with a non-parked part, like a 7600, and then you later socket a 7950X3D and use that profile to jumpstart, say, the tertiary and subtimings for the memory, then those two options that I just named will remain disabled from the prior CPU, at least on the Crosshair Hero. Caveats here about, like, with our BIOS and with this test setup. So that's what happened this round of testing. It's a good lesson you can learn if you ever upgrade in socket. Now, to solve for this going forward, we have a combination of an additional manual step in our setup process where we're going to inspect the settings manually and double check them. And then additionally, this was not necessary before just because our process was different. We overhauled everything for the last round of testing, so that's covered now. Then additionally, I mean, this is exactly why we made the errors page as well, which is at gamersnexus.net/errors. And it's why we have the pop out. I think it's over here. It looks like that if you want to see it in videos. So ideally, I'd prefer to not use the errors page. That is, in fact, the objective, but that's why it's there. So recapping, the only thing affected in our 9800X3D review is the 7950X3D's gaming performance. The new data is up, and we're showing it now. None of the other CPUs are affected. No non-gaming results are affected. This also does not affect our conclusion that gaming users should buy a 9800X3D or a 7800X3D if it's cheaper instead for gaming, and that production users should buy the 7950X non-3D or the 9950X in cases that we test for, or potentially consider some Intel options, of course. So that hasn't really changed, but I did consider the data an error and wanted to correct it properly. It also sounds like there's some potential, maybe future dual CCD X3D considerations that AMD is undertaking for future products, which would rectify a lot of what we're talking about with the setup, where end users wouldn't have to be as diligent with setup and worrying about in-socket swaps and things, all the stuff we just talked about would be resolved. Now, not that we know of any future dual CCD X3D parts because we don't. Moving on to the next story, AMD 9950 X3D dual CCD rumors, including benchmark leaks. I wasn't the one who leaked it. In unrelated news, there are new benchmarks for it. A Factorio benchmark surfaced to be a Factorio box, which we found from Reddit, which found it from TechSpot, finding it from Olrak_29 on Twitter, who found it from Factorio box. Ah yes, the media centipede. We are so self-aware here at GN. The Reddit post says that the TechSpot post says that the Olrak tweet says that the Factorio box website says that the test result says the 9950 X3D scored 654.9 points. That's up from the 9800 X3D, the 7800 X3D, and the 7950 X3D. And here's the sort of critical part that's related to what we just talked about. The 7950 X3D on this website averages lower than the 7800 X3D, likely due to everything we just went over. While the 9950 X3D, keeping in mind it only has one result listed, averages higher than the 9800 X3D. This may or may not, nobody knows, support the fact that AMD may or may not be completely changing how all of this works and the drivers that may or may not be changing. Also, I think we'll add Factorial to our benchmarks for our next round of testing because actually a lot of you have requested Factorio over the years, so maybe it's a good one to look into for this, just looking at some of these leaked results that may or may not be real. Moving on, AMD's R7 9800 X3D has been a massive, staggering success for AMD. So it launched on November 7th. The reviews went up on the 6th. It immediately sold out. I actually tried to get another one for our GPU benches are going to go to 98 X3Ds, I think, and they're gone. So we'll get one somewhere else. But following largely positive global reviews from Hardware Press, it looks like it was out of stock in minutes. And a quick stock check shows that it's gone on Newegg, Amazon, and B&H Photo. We spoke with a few micro centers. I called a couple around the country on the phone and found that they were also out of stock. Bundle deals lasted longer, including at Newegg, which helped retailers move stagnant motherboard inventory that was sitting, but even that sold through. Speaking with multiple anonymous sources we have, including vendors, as in partners of AMD, and some of the retailers, the combined sold units is pretty high, so I don't have an exact number, but I know that at least representing some of the larger vendors in the US, they were in the thousands of units that sold within minutes, basically. So it does appear to have been a pretty substantial launch by total volume. It just evaporated instantly because of the demand. So it appears to actually just be that popular with legions of buyers, which makes sense given the onslaught of bad CPUs that have launched this year and the scourge they were upon the market. We've actually seen a lot of scalpers selling these CPUs at stupid prices. I wanted to remind you all to just be careful of that. So first-party retail listings are often accompanied by third-party ones. When the first-party ones go out of stock, you might still see an add to cart button with a very high price. Just be aware of who's actually selling it. It's normally under the button. Now, try and help with this sort of PSA. We asked AMD how frequently it expects the CPUs to restock and at what interval or capacity they might be. Of course, they didn't give us any firm numbers, but they did give some date ranges. So AMD said this, quote, AMD is thrilled at the excitement and interest in our new Ryzen 7 9800 X3D processor. We're working diligently to get as much supply to the market as soon as possible, with more processors being shipped every week. We expect availability to get better as shipments ramp throughout the quarter. Now, we continue to ask around for a couple of other sources as well, and we found that most retailers are stocking once to twice a week, and some of the larger ones are at least once a week. So it looks like there's going to be kind of a steady flow of supply. Now for Europe, 3D Center reported on several retailers that had sold through the 9800 X3D early. 3D Center also reported that Mindfactory, which is a large retailer in Germany, has already pre-sold through subsequent shipments and will be back ordered for some time. Tom's Hardware states that Mindfactory, quote, is purportedly canceling pre-orders due to inability to fulfill them, end quote. And we checked with some anonymous AMD sources and learned that the demand really does appear to just be stripping through the supply like that. So all this just kind of reinforces that the market, the enthusiast segment, was ready for an actually winning part to be exciting. And positive reviews also give a ton more room for fun follow-ups like the XOC content, hopefully stream we're going to do, and some of the other cool stuff we're doing with the 9800X3D. So we have more tests coming up soon. I'm really excited about it. It's a lot more fun. We get a lot more cool content, educational stuff out of parts that are actually worthwhile and that we actually recommend. So we'll have more of that. But one more thing here too, AMD might have tariffs to consider in the US. There's been a talking point lately. CPUs, for AMD at least, are made in Taiwan, so they're made in TSMC for the silicon. And then they have some level of packaging or assembly in Malaysia. And even with that, tariffs will still affect the greater PC component ecosystem, even if they don't affect that specific part, because it's not made in China and shipped from China. We're not tariffs like sort of international trade experts here, but that's kind of my basic understanding of it. If, however, there is a tariff impact on the larger ecosystem that causes prices to go up and the demand to go down because people just can't afford all the motherboards and cases and all the things that get attached to a CPU, then AMD might be looking at that and trying to push more stuff out of the door earlier. But anyway, companies will theoretically capitalize on the lower prices as long as they can to hit volume, because the PC market through the earlier parts of this year was in a bit of a downturn depending on which segment you looked at. So anyway, as you all know, we stay out of the political side of the discussion, but we will report on any developments on PC prices as they affect the market and as the any potential changes actually manifest and give us something to talk about. All right, next one. AMD isn't the only one that is suing Intel. Do you see what I did there? It's because Lisa, as shadows loom over Intel, another eldritch horror awaits. Lawyers. A class action complaint has been filed against Intel over its Raptor Lake CPU failures. The complaint has been filed with demand for a jury trial in California. The complaint states this, quote, Intel released its 13th and 14th generation desktop processors in 2022 and 2023. Consumers bought the processors, reasonably believing that they would work as intended in computers, but the processors were defective. They were unstable, prone to crashing, and failed at high rates. Intel ultimately revealed that the instability was caused by a defect that allowed elevated operating voltage, which would damage processors and cause instability, failures, and crashes. The document continues saying, quote, throughout 2023 and 2024, multiple users and tech websites reported that Intel's 13th and 14th gen core desktop processors were defective, unstable, and crashing at high rates. The processors were returned at unusually high rates by users. And they also included several pieces of evidence in here. They showed Intel's advertising and listings on retailers, and the document writes this, quote, if Intel wanted to be truthful, it would have clearly and prominently warned consumers that the chips are defective and subject to instability problems and unusually high crash and failure rates. Intel's packaging, however, did not disclose any of these problems, and thus made material misstatements and omissions. Intel's material omissions increased the demand for its products. As a result, Intel was able to charge more for its products than it would have been had its packaging and ads truthfully disclosed the defect. Accordingly, as a direct result of Intel's false statements and material omissions, Intel was able to charge a price premium for its products, end quote. One more segment here for you all, quote, due to press reports, online complaints, its own testing, and return rates, Intel knew the truth about its defect in late 2022 or early 2023. Thus, Intel knew that the statements on its packaging and ads were false and misleading to reasonable consumers. Intel intended that consumers rely on these false and misleading statements when purchasing the products. Now, interestingly, we actually have direct statements on record that we've already published from Intel that indicated that it became aware of at least some types of its defect in 2022. So it's not a Intel knew about it in late 22 or early 23. I mean, they told us on record, quoted 2022. So that's known. It's not based on online complaints, but something they actually told us. That's in our Intel Bloodbath video, if anyone wants the history and more on that. The class action is currently a complaint. It is seeking yet undetermined damages. They say excess of $5 million, but that could be basically anything with these. And it's likely contingent on how many people actually sign up and what stage in the process they get. In other Intel news, in the past 2 weeks, the company was removed from the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The Dow is an index of 30 companies on the US stock exchange. Intel was first added to the Dow in 1999, and via Wikipedia we learned this. Quote, Microsoft, Intel, SBC, and Home Depot replaced Goodyear Tire, Sears Roebuck, Union Carbide, and Chevron Corporation. That was in '99. Wikipedia's entry also states that, quote, Intel and Microsoft became the first and second companies traded on the NASDAQ to be part of the Dow. Now, Intel recently was officially replaced on November 8th, and its replacement was NVIDIA. NVIDIA's market cap bounces around a lot, but it's been above $3 trillion for some time now. NVIDIA and Apple remain among the top valued companies, and Intel currently has a market cap at the time of writing this of $112 billion. That will change by the time you see the screenshot in the video, but it's somewhere around there. CNBC reports, quote, with the addition of NVIDIA, 4 of the $6 trillion tech companies are now in the index. The 2 not in the Dow are Alphabet and Meta, end quote. Now, all of this comes at a time when Intel has been in the process of laying off somewhere in the range of 15 to 20,000 employees when you combine the layoffs with the voluntary departures, early retirements, things like that. Number gets indeterminate at this point, but it is 15,000 sort of minimum from what we know. The company has also scaled down on costs. This includes everything from corporate jet usage and their shuttle between campuses, as we understand it, all the way down to fruits and coffee in the break rooms. Intel is having a hard time right now. Its earnings went live last week for the most recent quarter, reporting a revenue of $13.3 billion for the quarter. Now, the company stated that it is making, quote, significant progress on the plan to deliver $10 billion in cost reductions in 2025. A large part of that progress recently has been layoffs. Intel also stated this, quote, restructuring changes meaningfully impacted Q3 profitability as we took important steps toward our cost reduction goal. The actions we took this quarter, being well, there were a couple, but layoffs are the big ones, position us for improved profitability and enhanced liquidity as we continue to execute our strategy. We're encouraged by improved underlying trends reflected in our Q4 guidance, end quote. Intel published several slides relating to its earnings, including one which indicated a total year-over-year fall of 7% in the client computing group. This group would include Intel's consumer products that we primarily cover. There was also an 8% fall in the Intel Foundry revenue, a 44% fall in Altera, 8% in Mobileye, and gains in data center and AI, which is one group, for 9% there, and network and edge as another group at 4%. Intel products still remains the primary driver of Intel revenue in total, based on the sort of pie chart style breakdown they have. Intel slides stated that it is down 6% year over year for revenue, but above the August outlook. In related news, Yahoo News ran an interview with Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, which we found via Tom's Hardware, with Gelsinger quoted as saying this, quote, it's well over 2 years since the CHIPS Act passed, and over that period, I've invested $30 billion in U.S. manufacturing, and we've seen $0 from the CHIPS grants. This has taken too long. This was a critical quarter for Intel. The major restructuring efforts that we've largely finished this quarter, that sort of ends in the middle of the sentence there, will say the second phase of the transformation as we move from getting back in the game, and we invested heavily in capacity and technology development and products that were competitive. Now it's time for us to focus on having the financial and shareholder returns associated with those heavy investments of the last 3.5 years, end quote. Gelsinger also expressed that he was, quote, disappointed by the time it's taken to get done, and that is referring to the CHIPS Act. Now, the CHIPS Act was passed under the current administration in the White House of the U.S. and is intended to supply funding to not just Intel, but multiple different semiconductor manufacturing facilities to develop their plants in the U.S. and sort of quote-unquote create manufacturing jobs. That is how it's billed. We have no political commentary on any of this. That is what you need to know, though, to understand the basics. So this follows Intel's disastrous 285K launch with Arrow Lake. Arrow Lake, to our understanding, was supposed to be at least more manufactured in Intel's facilities, and TSMC ended up getting that job. So it has failed to meet even Intel's own standards and failed to meet the performance marks that Intel set in its marketing slides and just in the slides of practicality and pragmatism where you have options on the market. And this is one of the things where even though Intel has improved efficiency and has brought down the power and thermal as a direct result of that, these two things alone are not enough to necessarily justify a purchase for a consumer. Because what matters for the consumer is the total package of the product, and that includes things like price and competition. And when competition's more efficient, and that's the key selling point, and it has better performance, then there's not much reason to buy Intel for the Ultra 200 series in the segment we cover. So anyway, they're in a rough spot right now, and Intel has a lot more work to do. Let's move on to the next one. A judge denies motions in the ARM v. Qualcomm cases. So in other industry news, we recently reported on how ARM and Qualcomm are suing each other. They're on friendly terms that way. And the legal proceedings are moving forward with a judge denying motions from both sides. A motion hearing between both companies was held on October 30th, with Judge Mary Ellen Norica presiding. After hearing both sides' arguments, Norica denied numerous motions. The written court ruling reads this, quote, ARM's motion to exclude certain expert opinions and testimony of Dr. Patrick Kennedy is denied, and their motion to exclude certain expert opinions of John Coates is denied as moot. Patrick Kennedy runs the Serve the Home outlet and YouTube channel and put out a video providing an overview of the legal feud between ARM and Qualcomm. John Coates, on the other hand, appears to be an engineer at Qualcomm with whom we are not familiar. The ruling also reads this, quote, the defendant's request for additional discovery as it pertains to the letters filed on October 28, 2024, is denied. Finally, the parties shall have additional settlement talks in person with the decision makers present. A joint letter on the details and outcome of these talks shall be filed by November 27th, end quote. And assuming those talks fall through, currently the trial between ARM and Qualcomm is set to take place December 16th. We've covered this in the past with some different hardware news stories. I don't remember which ones right now, but where a judge basically steps in and says, no, you guys, you need to talk like adults and work this out, and then come back to me later. So that seems to be what's going on right now, push towards a settlement. It would reduce load on the courts and send them through channels that you often see companies settling anyway. So currently both companies are suing each other. This makes things a little confusing to follow if you read follow-up stories online, because depending on which case you're looking at, Qualcomm and ARM are both the defendant and the plaintiff, depending on the case. So for context, ARM had previously stated that it is suspending Qualcomm's license. It gave the company 60 days notice. We reported this a week or two ago in news. And that would theoretically sever a large part of Qualcomm's earning capabilities, although it does have outside products. ARM is a large part of its business nonetheless. Next up, speaking of ARM, NVIDIA, which tried to buy ARM at one point. It didn't, but it tried. Currently uses ARM solutions in its server products as well. They might have an ARM-based CPU coming up for not server, but consumer. This is a rumor right now. There's really not a ton to this. The rumor is that there's a CPU prepared for September 2025 launch on ARM-based solutions. These would be made in partnership with Taiwanese company MediaTek, which NVIDIA regularly collaborates with on its G-Sync implementations. The original source is paywalled at Digitimes. It was picked up by several media outlets. The rumor is that NVIDIA is aiming to produce a consumer-grade CPU, likely for portables like laptops, but currently unspecified. This would deploy both its own GPUs and ARM solutions. We see this in server, where they have the Grace solution with its various GPUs. The rumor stated that a consumer launch would happen first, which is not always the case for NVIDIA, planned for September of next year, with a business-grade commercial launch in 2026. Now, interestingly here, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang commented just a week or two ago on the new x86 EIG, or the something advisory group for x86. Intel and AMD did it. There are a couple other people involved. Commented on that, basically saying go for it and encouraging further x86 collaborative development. But an ARM solution would not require such development. Now, NVIDIA sells GPUs to anybody who will buy them for any platform that can use them. So they are making money either way. All roads appear to lead to NVIDIA for some of these things like AI solutions. So anyway, that's kind of the situation right now. If there is a MediaTek NVIDIA CPU, this has been rumored before. So we talked previously about a potential consumer-grade part that would be found in a rumored, not yet proven, NVIDIA handheld gaming device. This is following all of the sort of recent advent in handheld portables like the Steam Deck and the Lenovo Legion Go and things like that. It sounds like they have something going on, because this is not the first time this story has come up. In other industry news, the construction of one of the world's future most advanced fabrication facilities for semiconductors on the planet is slightly delayed. And it's because of a golf course. The Central Taiwan Science Park in Taichung, Taiwan is set to be the location of TSMC's upcoming fab that'll develop 2nm chips. According to the Central Taiwan Science Park, 95.32% of that land, it's very precise, has already been agreed to for purchase. This includes the Xingnon golf course. But United Daily News reports that its golf members are demanding buybacks of their golf certificates for a price of 1.8 million new Taiwan dollars each, which translates to roughly 56,000 US dollars each. Tom's Hardware reports that, quote, this amount is based on 80% of the average new Taiwan dollar 2.2 million price of one golf share for a course based in central Taiwan over the past 2 years. Now, $56,000 for TSMC sounds like an inconvenience. It's like the equivalent of when they ask you if you want to round up at checkout. They just said, sure, it's another 56K. It's like a wafer or two. The problem is that there are 1,750 certificates. In other words, that would be 3.15 billion Taiwan dollars, or roughly 98.5 million US dollars. Despite the seemingly stiff bill, United Daily News reports that the owners of the golf course could still receive between 15 and 20 billion new Taiwan dollars, or roughly 470 to 626 million, even when you account for the certificate buybacks. The publication writes that the Xingnon golf course, quote, has been avoiding coordinating with its members, end quote, which is sparking discussion regarding filing lawsuits and starting protests. The Central Taiwan Science Park is asking this matter to be resolved before December 15th, or it may simply seize the land through expropriation. Speaking of TSMC, Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger may have had a bit of a flub or a gaffe that cost the company, Intel, a 40% discount on some of its TSMC wafer supply previously. Now, this results from what is reported to be basically an offense taken by TSMC when Gelsinger made some public commentary. So, the news comes from Reuters, citing 4 unnamed people. TSMC has previously acknowledged the statements and did, in fact, seem offended, but there's some news here in addition to that. Speaking on the dynamic between China and Taiwan, the latter of which is where TSMC is based, Gelsinger was quoted as saying in May 2021, quote, "You don't want all your eggs in the basket of a Taiwan fab," end quote. The following December, he was quoted as saying, quote, "Taiwan is not a stable place," end quote. And to ensure clarity, despite this comment, there is no active conflict. These comments were made in the backdrop of Intel working on its own competing Intel foundry. Intel allegedly had a discount from TSMC on fabrication on silicon made via TSMC for Intel products. TSMC publicly sort of downplayed this notion, with the company's founder, Morris Chang, calling Gelsinger, quote, "very discourteous." Privately, however, Reuters writes this, quote, "TSMC said it would no longer honor the discount," the sources said, about 40% off the $23,000 3nm wafers on which TSMC would print chips for Intel. Intel had to pay full price, shrinking its profit margin on the deal, end quote. Now this, again, comes at a time when Intel is really struggling to the extent that it couldn't even use its own fabs to make its own CPUs for the newest products, for desktop at least. And also does not have a whole lot of room to play around with losing such large discounts as the one reported by Reuters here. Now, we did ask Gelsinger for comment. This is what he sent.
Papa's here.
Moving on. This is an extreme overclocking story, and this one talks about record memory overclocks, but also a partial AI, partial human-designed, kind of insane-looking liquid nitrogen or liquid helium pod. DDR5 frequency has been taken to new heights in a recent world record run. Extreme overclocker SafeDisk pushed a single 24 gigabyte stick of G-Skill Trident Z5 RGB to 6,055.9 megahertz, or 12,112 megatransfers per second. The motherboard was an Asus Z890 Apex board, which is intended for overclocking. The CPU was an Engineering Sample 285K, and interestingly, it only had 4 P cores and 4 E cores in the detected readout. Several other overclockers put similar scores up on the same day. At the time this was posted, it was a new world record run. Our 285K review showed limited circumstances where super high-speed memory pushed the CPU to the top of the chart in some of the games, such as Starfield and 7-zip compression, at least for non-gaming on the latter there, although everybody does like a good 7-zip compression match. It bears repeating that pushing memory speed on the other CPUs in those very charts we had would raise their respective results by some degree as well. But the fact of the matter is that Intel has a few places where it can strongly benefit. Following the same event, Asus published a range of top-scoring results using the same Z890 Apex board, including 4 world records set by Elmore. The system used liquid helium and a $10,000 3D printed, partially AI designed copper LN2 pot, or liquid helium in this case, that was completed earlier this year, but remains very interesting and immediately relevant. The project was a collaboration between Scatterbencher, Elmore, an advanced 3D printing company called 3D Systems, and thermal design company, we're going to go with Diabetics. I tried to Google search how to pronounce it, and Google told me diabetes, which I don't think is the correct way to say that word. That's a different word. I was not able to find anything for how to pronounce this company's name. We're going to go with Diabetics. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The team started with the base design principles of the Elmore Labs Volcano Pod, then used the D Company's generative AI system to quickly iterate upon the unorthodox and organic-looking cooler. They simulated thermal performance before committing to the final design. The manufacturing process itself is called oxygen-controlled copper printing, and it utilizes powdered copper deposited in layers, which is then blasted with a high-power laser to sinter and form the rigid structure one slice at a time. This method enables the design to incorporate intricate geometries that are impossible to construct with traditional CNC machining or casting. The resulting LN2 pot showed dramatically improved results as compared to traditional designs, with 3 times faster cooldown, they say, and 1.2 times faster heat up and increased LN2 efficiency. So in XOC terms, it is both slower and faster at the same time, which are both good things for liquid nitrogen. If you're interested in this at all, definitely check out the full post on Scatterbencher's site. Again, some of this is from much earlier this year, but it's a great read, and there's also some interesting stuff regarding water cooling cold plates designed in the same way. And it's always nice to see man-made elemental horrors beyond comprehension. This, though, sets some records for overclocking, and it also sets the backdrop with Bearded Hardware soon coming up to do some XOC with us. Up next, Supermicro might be in trouble. So Supermicro makes motherboards, they assemble servers, and they just saw their accounting firm resign recently, which under typical circumstances might not mean much, but in this case it looks like it will. So Ernst & Young is the accounting firm that Supermicro retains for its SEC statements and filings preparation. And that company has resigned from its contract with Supermicro. This has caused Supermicro's share price, or at least seems to have caused, certainly correlates with it, to crater by over 30% at the time we wrote this story. Sections of Ernst & Young's resignation letter were published in an SEC document, which contain the stated reasons for resignation. Quote, "We are resigning due to information that has recently come to our attention, which has led us to no longer be able to rely on management and the audit committee's representations, and to be unwilling to be associated with the financial statements prepared by management." Management here referring to Supermicro's. The quote continues, "And after concluding we can no longer provide the audit services in accordance with applicable law or professional obligations," end quote. So that's some potentially extremely damning phrasing considering the gravity of the situation. Misreporting financials to the SEC is potentially a huge crime, and it seemed that Ernst & Young has seen enough to be uncomfortable with the associated risk. The accounting firm raised concerns about Supermicro's governance, transparency, and internal control over financial reporting back in July. Supermicro then formed an audit committee. After more information came to light, Ernst & Young decided to quit. Supermicro responded by saying it disagrees with the statements made by its now former accounting firm, and also noted that it doesn't expect the need to reissue any of its prior statements for quarterly reports as adjustments or corrections. All of this follows the U.S. Department of Justice's investigation into Supermicro after Hindenburg Research published claims of accounting manipulation. Supermicro has gained a massive amount of stock value over the past several years, with a large amount of that due to the general sort of AI boom. Whether the company will survive or not will likely depend on the results from the DOJ investigation and its subsequent fallout, but the way in which the accounting firm resigned certainly doesn't look good for Supermicro. Up next, Sony shuttering Concord developer Firewalk Studios in what is the next installment of Everybody Saw That Coming. So after releasing what is arguably the biggest failure in video game history anytime recently with hero shooter Concord, which was so bad that Sony basically recalled it and refunded everyone, Firewalk Studios has now been shuttered. There was speculation that Sony, who acquired the Bellevue, Washington-based developer, might revive Concord as a free-to-play title, But that was ultimately squashed, with Sony Interactive Entertainment CEO Herman Hulst writing, quote, "We've spent considerable time these past few months exploring all our options. After much thought, we have determined the best path forward is to permanently sunset the game and close the studio." Concord launched to mixed reviews, garnering a 62 Metacritic score, but more interestingly, got bafflingly low player counts. According to SteamDB, which is not an official Steam property, but does track the game popularity, the game failed to surpass 700 concurrent players on Steam, capping out at 697, at least for concurrency. For perspective, probably about that amount of people will concurrently watch this video within minutes of it going live. And we didn't spend hundreds of millions of dollars on this video. So, but if you'd like to see what hundreds of millions of dollars spent on something that doesn't need it looks like, you can either go that way to Intel or that way to Supermicro. Either way, 697 concurrent players is pretty bad for a multiplayer shooter. As a matter of fact, before the game was permanently shut down, we captured this shot of the game's matchmaking in action. It's on the screen now. The Guardian reports that Concord's development cost ranged between 200 to 400 million. That's a large margin, but even 200 is a lot of money. Sony took the game offline September 6th. To its credit, the company offered full refunds to those who purchased the game via PC and PS5. Hulst also revealed that Sony would be shuttering studio Neon Koi, who was working on an unannounced mobile game. The CEO wrote, quote, "Neon Koi will close and its mobile action game will not be moving forward," end quote. AMD is rumored to have a ton of stuff coming up at CES. We've already talked about sort of NVIDIA in the news for CES, which is the second week of January. This year it's going to be January 7th to 10th. I said this year. Next year. This year is the word I use for the next year when it's the end of the current year. You'll get used to it eventually. So, according to PC World, in a roadmap update, AMD CEO Lisa Su stated, quote, "We are on track to launch the first RDNA 4 GPUs in early 2025, end quote. CEO Lisa Su also mentioned, quote, "In addition to strong increases in gaming performance, RDNA 4 delivers significantly higher ray tracing performance and adds new AI capabilities," end quote. These GPUs are expected to be called the RX 8000 series. They are not expected to compete directly with high-end NVIDIA GPUs. AMD's actually already talked about that. However, it will likely cater to the mid-range market. We'll see what kind of entry level we get these days. Months ago, AMD told Tom's Hardware, quote, "So my number one priority right now is to build scale to get us to 40, 50% of the market faster. Do I want to go after 10% of the total addressable market or 80%? I'm an 80% kind of guy because I don't want AMD to be the company that only people who can afford Porsches and Ferraris can buy." And he'd know because having the letters VP in your title at a tech company instantly elevate you to the status of being able to buy Porsches. Add an S in there, now you've unlocked Ferraris. It's like a tech tree. The quote continued, and again, this is from months ago, "We want to build gaming systems for millions of users. Yes, we will have great products, but we tried that strategy, King of the Hill. It hasn't really grown. ATI has tried this King of the Hill strategy, and the market share has kind of been the market share." Now, more recently, according to The Verge, Su revealed that gaming only represents 2% of AMD's revenue, with well over half of the company's revenue derived from data centers. Delving into specifics, PC World reports that AMD's gaming division revenue fell nearly 70%, largely driven by the decline in sales of the PS5 and Xbox consoles. Outside of GPUs, according to hardware leaker John Donghao, AMD is also expected to showcase new laptop Zen 5-based APUs with Kraken Point, Strix Halo, and Fire Range or Fire Range X3D. In addition, the leaker also states that the Ryzen Z2 Extreme, Z2, and Z2G handheld APUs we've previously reported on will also be present at CES. Finally, the leaker suggested that AMD's 9950 X3D and 9900 X3D will also be shown off at the event. In the roadmap update call, which is the official call, not rumor stuff, Su stated, quote, "I think the main point is this is the strongest PC portfolio we've had in our history. I think across desktop and notebook." So that's it for hardware news this week. We have reviews coming up, a lot of CPU stuff. Actually, the Be Quiet Light-Based 600 for the case side of things is coming up too. So if you want to see that one, check back. You'll want to be back tomorrow for some of the CPU reviews. This video goes up on schedule. And you can check out our dice on store.gamersnexus.net if you want to buy one of the two dice sets with either E-Waste Inductors or Snowflake the Cat. So check out store.gamersnexus.net for those. Thanks for supporting us. And thanks for checking out the news. We'll see you all next time.